Of ours. Let me call Paul up. Paul Gelb is the head of programmatic and social at Bayer. In recent years, Bayer is one of those major brands that has brought its media in-house. But one of the things that Paul's going to talk about is not just that process of bringing things in-house, but the ways in which it also changed the way they came at media and the ways in which they did their planning. And we're going to talk about that evolution. Paul is the head of social and programmatic at Bayer. He leads relationships with all the major marketplaces and platforms, including Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Pinterest. Previously, he was the head of programmatic at Twitter. So please welcome our old friend, Paul Gelb. Hey, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having me and for the opportunity.
Let's start. I like to always start with the basics about understanding the breadth of Bayer's digital media buying. Tell us a little bit about the brand. First of all, tell us a little bit about the brands that you cover, because Bayer is obviously massive, and then sort of what the breadth and the role of digital has been for these brands.
Sure. So I now have the pleasure of working on a number of consumer health brands that prior to working at Bayer, I didn't know that Bayer owned. So Coppertone, Aleve, Dr. Scholl's, Claritin. So you'll probably be using one of those products, or they're in a cupboard at home or in your suitcase. So full scope of consumer health products I oversee.
They're radically different strategies for some of those. Could you give us a couple examples of how, say, a Claritin is very different from a Dr. Scholl's in terms of what you need to do digitally?
So I'm pretty much a big fan of simplifying things. I have a unique background in that I've been everywhere but the brand side before working at Bayer. So started the mobile practice and the mobile training desk on the agency side, worked at Twitter, head of programmatic, worked on the SSP side, data. And so I would say from a media tactic perspective, it's actually very similar in nearly all cases for the brands that we work on. The brand positioning, what they are, their messaging, the creative, I think that it winds up being very different. But we like to focus on knowing what works, measuring, and then getting stuff that actually has huge impact. So the two tactics and areas that we're doing across brands is one, being able to just buy media really efficiently and understand where there are undervalued pockets of media to a point where I can be in front of buyers of the product, no matter what product that is, throughout the year at the right frequency to get that top of the funnel awareness. No matter how much we love our products as a company, we know that people don't spend as much time considering them and considering that purchase as we do thinking about our own products. So very much funneled, focused on awareness and having that resonance, because that's the person who buys that product for that household. And then two is when we can and spend a little bit more right by that point of purchase, that's where we also want to make sure that we pay and we're there and we're paying a premium for. So we're targeting people in nearby stores that have inventory, dynamically telling them how far that store is, that day's pricing or promotion, and then measuring the actual purchase through matching sales and who is exposed. So those are the two areas that we're really focusing on across brands and digital.
How has digital spend grown for Bayer?
So it's growing exponentially. So Bayer is, one of the reasons why I joined was that 2015, 16, Bayer was still buying through Xaxis, which is as non-transparent as you can get, throwing dollars over the wall. Had been a TV buyer for a long time. They're almost predominantly TV. So when I've come on, it's been a process of really building up from scratch what we're doing in digital. But it has been, I think, growing exponentially with all the brands very hungry to do it. So we're not where P&G and some of the other folks who have been earlier adopters in the space, but our growth rates are multiples each year.
Is money moving from TV to digital?
So there is some shifts from traditional media into digital, as well as just digital growing from circulars, radio, print, other channels as well, doing other things efficiently internally. So we haven't had a huge shift and decline in TV yet, but I think we're very conscious of the numbers and the cost of the lack of flexibility, in terms of the buying cycle with TV. So I think this year and next year are going to be really key years in terms of how we figure out exactly how these budgets interact together. But I would say what we found out is that there was a huge focus on fully integrating everything in TV and digital, and that it had to be integrated, collaborative, et cetera. And what I think I noticed pretty early on is that that's not a business objective or a goal. If we all work nicely together in TV and digital, match up every lockstep every step of the way, and the output of that campaign is not getting results, and we're undervaluing what we do in digital, and we're underinvesting in digital, it doesn't matter that we were integrated. The marketing plan wasn't as good as it should have been. And so the costs of not doing digital well are much higher than the cost of not fully integrating and making sure that you're doing everything TV's way from a 12-month period start to finish.
We're going to get to that process of how you're fixing that, and also the ways in which what's happening in digital is going to inform the TV buy. You mentioned that you look for undervalued pockets of opportunity. How does this translate into, say, buying direct versus programmatic, and are there particular areas that you're finding unexpected value now?
So I would say that, except in very edge cases, I don't see any product or any model or measurement where buying direct is profitable or makes sense in terms of your dollars. But in terms of ad marketplaces, and looking at the 6 scaled platforms that we are focusing on now today, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, and Programmatic, I've used my experience in terms of being on the other side and understanding how those marketplaces work. And there are 2 things that you could do really well to get your media dollars to perform and get the most out of those. And that is either knowing when there's media costs that are lower than the value of that media, and it's just less expensive, and no matter what, at that cost point, it doesn't matter how well it performs, or if it performs great, it's just a great cost point that no one's buying that inventory. Or 2, you know enough about that user and that audience and targeting them, and you know exactly what the value of that user is, and so you could accurately buy how valuable that impression is. So we don't have a lot of data at Bear. We don't own the register. We're really just building out our tech infrastructure and what we're doing. So to date, our focus has been more on understanding the way that everyone else is buying in marketplaces, the way agencies and what their policies are, and then us knowing that how they work and finding the inventory that not a lot of people are bidding on, but is extremely valuable.
Did you say you're not finding a lot of value in direct?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any measurement to date that shows that you're not going to, lose 50, 90 cents of profit for every dollar you invest today. There's sales cost in there is 42-step process costs. At the price points that it's being sold today, I haven't seen any value in years of buying direct.
Publishers are not going to like.
Well, I think publishers, it's a tough business to be in. So at MoPub was, inherently our mission was to enable publishers to monetize, make money, and do what they're going to do. I think if your model is based on a direct sales and advertising, that's your only revenue stream, then that's going to be a tough model to make work in the long term. In terms of the numbers, I think if you're a publisher, event revenue, having some paid services, some e-commerce, and finding out the right way to gain distribution across major platforms and monetize that inventory and match and work closer. You can still work closer with brands and help them find their audiences and show value there. So I'm more than willing to pay $1,000 CPM if you could show me the value of it. But buying direct in-house, bought and sold, I haven't seen that.
So let's talk about this process you guys started a couple of years ago, bringing more of this in-house. So what does bringing in-house mean to Bear? What was that process? And what was the decision-making behind it?
So the initial decision predated me, so I was pulled in. We had 1 or 2 folks that were did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of making the transition off of Xaxis, getting some initial tech stack agreements, DSP tagging in place. But what we wound up doing was finding a core group of folks that had the right experience, and I found that the best hires, and I might be biased, but I will check that bias when I see other data, that ad tech experienced people who understand the middle and the technology and how to be analysts and traders of media. And so we really have set up what I call our island of misfits. So we are a little bit centralized and separate, and are able to really focus on doing things right. And we have myself, who oversees all the activation platforms, so our strategy, every optimization we're doing, how we work with the major platforms, measurement and insight. So someone takes all the data from everything that we are buying, everything that we are seeing, makes it usable for me, allows me to socialize it and teach people in the organization. We have someone who's, it's technically called analytics, but he's essentially make sure that all the data is available for insights. And I just don't know very much about search, so we have, the head of our group comes from search, and we have a head of search. So we are a tag team of misfits on the platform side, and then we have strategists that help support the brand. But small, capable team, and our thought was, you don't necessarily have to bring everything in-house immediately, but no matter what, in today's world, you can't just buy through another party and throw dollars over a wall. You're gonna need expertise.
Well, so, but what was the why? What was the goal in Bear doing this? What was the problem they saw somebody located that they were trying to solve?
So I think if you looked at the spend allocation and what they were getting out of digital in terms of the role that was playing versus competitors, that when it was all rolled up under media and overly delegated to the agency, that clearly they were, the investments and the dollars and the level of execution was not there. And so you needed to have, I think the same way, if you, what I like to say is when Microsoft tried to launch a phone, it had the phone in the same building, it ran off of Windows, and it was not the best product that Microsoft has ever launched. If you look at what they did with Xbox, they put it in a separate building, didn't allow it to talk to the Windows folks, didn't run on Windows 95, was a huge hit in terms of a product. So I think at a certain point, they saw that there was a need to separate it, make sure we're doing it really well, and then integrate into everything we're doing in the business.
What's been the chief benefit so far?
So, well, in the first 6 weeks of work after I joined, we reduced our cost of digital media by 50%, and then a month later, we are now 60 to 70% lower than what we were paying, with zero loss in quality. In fact, quality and performance has improved. We put in place a bunch of measurement multi-touch attribution to show that we're now getting $2.50 of profit for where we're buying in platforms versus our previous digital buys, where we were losing 50 cents to 90 cents depending on what we were doing in every dollar digital invested. Our percentage of fraud impressions in programmatic went down from 9% to 1%. Our brand safety impressions have not changed.
But why couldn't you do that piece before, by the way? Since you mentioned fraud, God, there are a zillion safeguards in place that agencies and platforms claim they're putting in. Why were you able to do it better than they were?
Because I ripped out everything that the agency had put in and put in our own policies based on what I saw behind. So we don't use their whitelist anymore. We don't use their viewability policies. It's about hiring people who I think are data-based, understand the impact and how marketplaces and technologies work, and don't necessarily come from a 15-second TV background. So even our definition of viewability has changed. We were previously using an agency definition, which was an industry standard, which was volume on, full view of 15 seconds. Our best practice for creative on mobile and most of what we're buying is 6 to 10 seconds, works volume on, volume off. So if we did the right job for creative, someone watched that with sound off for 6 seconds, it's not a view. And I'm not optimizing to even buying that inventory. So I think it's I think that there's a lot of expertise that brands can now tap into, people who have had their hands on keyboards and understand how supply and demand and ad marketplaces work, just like stock markets work. I mean, there are people who are billionaires who traded soybeans and pork bellies and never saw a soybean or a pork belly, but traded those commodities. So I think it's just a different skill set than what the people who are in charge of it at agencies have.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I hear so much from brands who are bringing things in-house. They want more control over their data. They want closer contact to their consumer. You're talking about having a hand on the wheel and feeling the road better, where you're really seeing, you're starting to come up with your own ideas of what viewability is. I mean, you're coming up with your own measure and your own sense of how this media is working throughout the ecosystem. You just have a much more granular and detailed and hands-on sense of what you want the media to achieve and the ways in which the mechanisms let you do it.
I mean, and so I would just add that you know, Bayer's a 200-year-old company. It started out and made its name off of manufacturing actually closed eyes really well, and then I think it's ridden the ability to then not only scale production of a quality product, but then get distribution through retailers, then to diversify products, so not just a lead, but a lead back in pain, Claritin, Claritin D, and that sort of manufacturing and distribution through retail partners was core to what Bayer did well, what made it perform as a company. We are now looking in the past 5 years that after 60, 70 years, the 5 most valuable companies had been, for almost 100 years, industrial revolution companies. So oil, steel, gas, they're all now data and media companies. So for us to succeed in this world, we have to do digital media buying and understand data and marketing really well. And so to outsource that to a third party that may not necessarily have the same incentives and objectives, even though they're you know, called an agency and working on your behalf, is something that I think you have to question and second guess, because if you don't do this well, in a world that is now dominated by companies and being able to execute with data and advertising, I think you know you're losing out with your core expertise that you need to be successful.
You set me up beautifully for the next stage of this, which is really the nut of this, is how it is fundamentally changing your thinking about media planning and buying. And again, this is almost as tectonic a shift as the move from an industrial revolution to a data revolution. So that all the ways in which mass media used to be bought and sold and thought about and planned is very different from a data-driven approach. You described it to me, and I'm going to let you try to explain this difference between the traditional, what you would call a top-down model of media planning and buying that had tended to be driven by TV and that sensibility and that mass medium, to where you think digital and data and having this greater direct control of all of this and the hands on the wheel is driving what you call a more bottom-up model of media planning that's going to influence anyone. Just outline that concept.
So I think that the first thing that's important to understand in the room is the difference between correlation and causation. And so my first jobs on the agency side, had met with a bunch of clients and was just learning how they were making decisions in terms of how hundreds of millions of dollars of media was being spent. And when I heard out there's a model that told them, hey, if you spend this much in TV, then you're going to get sales, and this is what I should do, and the model told me to do it. And so I wanted to learn more about that magic, and I looked at the equation. I said, so what's this coefficient? And they said, well, this is the I want to buy TV coefficient. So I said, maybe there's not as much science behind the way that media buying is happening. And so what I learned was they were using correlation. So the best way to define correlation is, and I sort of sarcastically pitched this, was we had a client that was trying to launch an ice cream brand. And so I told them that our target market should be people who are about to or have committed murder. And that is because if you look at the rate of murder and the rate of purchase of ice creams, they're highly correlated. Whenever the rate of murder goes up, people buy a lot of ice cream. So I said,
Does Facebook have a segment on this?
Murderers are our target segment. But it obviously turns out that heat and economic hard times both leads to crime like murder, as well as people needing that 2-minute just break of happiness of ice cream. So clearly, and the market size for murderers would not have worked out for a scaled ice cream either way.
You didn't
so
test
it probably
that,
wasn't the best idea. So if you look at the way that media was bought on traditional channels, it had to use correlation. It didn't know if someone saw a radio or a TV ad. So what they had to do was look at a channel level. If I spent 100 million here, 50 million in radio, 25 million in print, get some sales numbers and say, oh, well, the 25 million in print correlated to sales in these markets of this. And so I can't say that this drove this, essentially, but there's a strong correlation. And the problem with correlation is it can allow you to tell whatever story you want and opens up to a ton of bias. One of the big things about digital is that we can now do causation. I know if I serve you an ad for, with ratings and here's a click it to Amazon, you click it, you go there, you saw the ad, you made the purchase. We also know people who are like you that didn't see the ad. You could actually say, hey, there's attribution. So it's not just correlation, or it's actually causation, and you're executing off of that. And so what we're now looking at is that even the high-level decisions of how much budgets are initially bucketed into different channels, as much as possible, should be based off of a bottoms-up approach and knowing the impact of these dollars on Facebook led out to this business income, and that's where we're going to start to have our money. Now,
Can I stop you there, because I want to stick with this correlation causation bit. Okay, that causation is trackable and attributable in an Amazon buy, yes. How is causation attributable when you're doing, say, local marketing that's pushing people towards stores, and you're seeing some uplift there, but how are you really calling that causation as opposed to simply correlation of another kind?
And so, so first I'll just have a caveat in that I would never recommend you waiting or thinking you're ever going to have all the measurement and all the information. And if you wait and you think that's a problem, the way that you execute, and you're saying full measurement is a business issue, then you're always going to be unhappy and challenged because you're never going to have all the information. That being said, with companies like LiveRamp today, the ability to match credit cards and find people on scaled media platforms is better than we've ever had. And so we are getting an increasing amount of data to be able to tie devices and people exposed on phones to offline cash registers, as well as an increasing growth in online sales, both with our traditional retail partners like Walmart, as well as Amazon. So the ability to reach people online and then track that performance offline is significantly increasing, where we have enough information to know a good range of what that impact is.
So, okay, so let's pull this all together, what a bottom-up model looks like that's different. How you take, so you have a sense of causation now. You're able to use, and digital is driving that. Yeah. Tell us about how that changes your approach to media planning.
So the way that media plans used to be done is you start 12 months ahead of time and you say, here are our objectives and what our strategy that we want to do. Then we're going to look at the channels and exactly how to use these channels, and then we're going to look at the model and saying, which channels contributed how much to sales, and then we're going to say we're going to put this much money in there because it had this correlation in terms of the impact on sales and it's going to achieve this objective. The way that we are looking at it is saying there's 6 major platforms. All those major platforms could address most of the objectives that we have. Some can address all of them. And we're going to start with a minimum budget in order to get measurement on those channels. And then we're going to have a flexible amount of budget to shift across them. And we're going to measure performance throughout the year and throughout the campaign, and do a bottoms up of how much to go to digital. And then we're going to tell the rest of the organization how much we're spending bottoms up on digital and allow them to use that number as a fixed number. And then they could do their top down on TV and traditional and however they want to correlate for their spend. So that is a much different approach. And when we looked at the way that we were doing it before, literally most of our brands were only on 1 or 2 of the 6 scaled platforms. Not even, it was extremely hard to start to spend on Twitter or Pinterest. We're just seeing amazing results right now in addition to what we're doing on platforms like Facebook and Google, because the numbers on these marketing mix models were 18 months old. It was not even the same creative, and there was no numbers from it. So if you have to cut one thing in a certain point of a calendar, or it's a significant risk without having that number backbone. But when you take this sort of bottoms-up approach and you say, here are the scale platforms I'm focusing on, every brand needs to have a minimum spend on it, the adoption rate has gone up, and we actually got performance and measurement and are in places we never would have been before. As well, we're able to shift to where we're seeing the best performance at that time instead of waiting for 18 months, and then there's so many variables that were existing 18 months ago that are no longer in existence in terms of, I mean, Dollar General is an amazing retail story. If you don't know anything about it, research it. And Dollar General, in terms of a sales source and one of our retail partners, 18 months ago is a completely different story. They're growing so fast. So that is the big difference. I think it's just being more agile and more flexible in where we spend our money and more attributable and actually having dollars being supported in terms of the decisions of where they go.
Can you give us an example of how what a media plan, how a media plan looks different today from what it did because of this?
So we have a lot less direct publisher deals. We have we have year-long budgets versus flighting. We have essentially spending a lot more time on just making sure we have measurement in place and check-ins on when we're going to take a look at numbers and make spend decisions. And we have a lot more flexible.
How often are you doing that now?
So we've been looking at things quarterly for some larger spend decisions. There are other spend decisions that there's flexibility for the centralized team to do on a weekly basis as needed.
Let's tie this back into the larger full plan, the non-digital plan. How is this going to inform, if it is already, TV spend?
So I think that's going to be phase 2. I think we want to make sure we're not chomping off more than we could chew, and to a certain extent, again, to circle back to a integration versus doing each channel well. So I've never liked the term omni-channel in any aspect. I like multi-channel, and every channel is different. And so I think what we want to make sure, and the biggest problem that we had was that the numbers in terms of how digital channels performed were not representative of what those channels could do. The way that was being executed and the execution noise was really poor, and so it led to poor decisions. So the first year we had the full digital team in places this year, and what I think we've been able to do is show the full capacity of digital, have that data under our belt. I think going into 19 is where we're going to start to look at ways that we're going to integrate more, but the priority number 1, which I think was the correct priority, was do digital well, get the full impact out of it, don't miss what you're missing.
You said you were seeing great increases in effectiveness. How were you measuring this? Were you measuring this in in-store sales mainly?
So we were measuring it in we're testing Nielsen, multi-touch attribution. We are looking and working with folks like Amazon. Next year we'll be talking to Facebook. So we are have done the most multi-touch attribution to date with Nielsen. We're doing sales lift studies, and we're triangulating those two numbers as much as possible.
So you're fairly confident in the systems that are being put in place now that are able to correlate between online exposure and offline activity?
In the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So we are we have a lot more that we could see today. The other thing that I love about Bayer that I really loved from my agency days, and even actually in every group, I was consistently told to focus on the big brands, clients, biggest budgets, most important. I always had 20% of my time for the smallest brands that nobody cared about, that got nothing, because there's no noise. So we have a group of great smaller profit star brands with great brand managers on them. We have no TV spend. We have no top-down marketing mix model. They are run very entrepreneurially, and we literally have zero marketing in dollars being put in place, and then we can launch a campaign and see impact of sales and a lot of different measurement without too many variables. So we're using those smaller brands as much as possible.
And that gives you a sense of the reliability of those channels of measurement for the other brands.
And if you're going to screw up, you might as well screw up on a smaller brand.
I want to Paul's covered an awful lot of ground here. Anybody have any questions for Paul?
Yeah. My name is Brittany Mitchell from State Farm. I have a double-part question. So are you guys using a DMP? If so, is it your team hands-on keyboards with the DMP? And then how are you connecting using the DMP with your MTA model?
So we're using the full Google stack today. I think it was a great way to move off of Xaxis and I don't think anyone gets in trouble for, in the past few years, for working closer with Google or Facebook. But as I said, we're starting from ground zero. So back half of this year, and really in earnest, September moving forward is where we're going to focus more on what we do with our DMP. But we were, essentially able to make 8-figure impacts in a matter of months, just being better media buyers and not any data of our own. So what we're doing in the DMP space is something that we have all the stakeholders, and something we can't necessarily only run with ourselves in our small island group. So we are really flushing out our data strategy and the DMP, and how and when it makes sense to own that, and what to actually structure within it. So that is what's keeping us busy as we've gotten more process and structure and have to spend less time on making the media work.
Are there any branding KPIs in all of this? I mean, the bias here seems to be towards performance and sales. So where does branding fit into all this?
So the bias we have is towards what we can measure and get meaningful data on. So that in general starts with your cost structure, and not cheap, but making sure you're paying market prices and having a base and are just not wasteful. I don't think you would have wanted to pay twice the room prices for speakers if you didn't have to. You're still getting the same room. You want to make sure you're at least paying as little. We want to make sure that at the end of the day we are looking at sales. We run a business, and there are metrics that are being used, like viewability rate, which doesn't impact my business. My costs do, and my revenue does. So that is there. We definitely are looking at upper funnel metrics for additional context. And so we found that, ironically, a lot of the audiences and targeting tactics we're using that we're driving sales for our products, where there's not a lot of consideration, is actually when we're reaching those people with upper funnel objectives, are actually having the most awareness and favorability risk. If you find that person in the household who is the person who buys that product, as long as you're not introducing a completely new product category, so whoever buying the sort of all-natural vitamins or vitamins for that family, what we've been measuring that as well, and so we've been pleased to see, because it simplifies things, that a lot of the same targeting we're using for people who buy are actually getting the most impact when we reach them on the upper funnel too.
We have one back here.
Hello, my name is Natalie Silvani. I'm at Quigley Simpson. Okay, so my question is, clearly you have a lot of expertise within your team, but how do you ensure sufficient thought diversity when you're in the Bayer bubble?
So we work really closely with the brands and have a ton of stakeholders. And so what I get the most satisfaction from is when I have a brand in the meeting that does not have a huge or significant digital background, and they ask a vendor or the agency or someone the exact right question to get the information that they need. So we're bringing in a lot of people who don't have our background into our decisions, educating them so they're at least conversant in a high level. Do they need to know about how throttling works and why beeswax is a great product to reduce that cost? No. But they are understanding basic concepts and bringing new ideas and asking questions that actually uncover stuff that we wouldn't know beforehand. The other way that we do it is we take a very much a data-based approach. So we never go in any meeting and say, I think or I believe. We make sure that we focus on data that's actionable, so that it's timely, it's meaningful, it's accurate. We focus on frameworks, and so any sort of disagreement or back and forth or discussion is, do we have the right data, do we have the right framework, and setting those measurement objectives up front. And then just investing in more and more measurement to have the right data. And then at the end of the day, I think we want to make sure that we're testing everything that we believe and assume the same way that we're testing assumptions that have been in place, and hold ourselves to those same standards. So it's in our performance objectives, our OKRs, PMPs, to align with that and make sure that we're testing ourselves as well. And so far it has been effective, but there's nothing wrong with bias. Everyone has bias. It's there. I think that's what we've been sort of repeating on our own internal frequency with all the teams a ton. It's just, if you have no checks on that bias. So we are keenly aware, having being a small group in a very large company, that other folks' bias impact us every day, just to make sure that we're not doing the same thing on our end.
I think we have one more.
Hi, my name is Swap. I work at McKinney. Couple of questions tied to two common challenges that clients have as it relates to media mix modeling and attribution. One is the accounting of long-term benefits to branding mediums like television versus short-term investments in things like paid search. And the second is more of a forward-looking desire or in real time trying to see what the impact of this analysis is versus a backwards-looking view, and market conditions and various other factors could change whether those analyses are going to be relevant moving forward. So I'm curious to learn about what you guys are doing, and if those are two common challenges that you guys still face and you're making the best of it, or if there's a different approach you're seeing that's better.
Yeah, so there were a number of instances throughout my career where I said, why are you buying this? There's no sales data or performance data or jack data that's doing it says that we should be buying. Said brand equity. I said, great. Well, you just spent 150 million in TV. Did you not get enough brand equity there that you need to be buying this direct publisher for $35 CPM? Say, no, we can't measure it. We're broken out by publisher and what we're doing. So I think brand equity is strong and it is powerful, but if you're making investment decisions and you can't see the impact of those, then you're just spending money where you think is right, and that's not going to get you to where you need to be. I think that Murder, She Wrote and cable news and a lot of where TV is being watched today by the 65-plus audience, that is the only audience that's growing, whether that is a better brand equity driver than other platforms, I don't think we have the data. I think TV had the most dollars and videos really engaging, but Coca-Cola and a lot of the early brands got a ton of brand equity by being on the back of matches, on lunch boxes, not really high engagement stuff, but just everywhere all the time. So, and I think you could do that with digital channels now. So I think brand equity is important, but you need to focus on driving results and having a good product and doing good customer service until you can measure that better. And otherwise, if you are where you are everywhere in front of your consumer and you do those other things, I think the companies we've seen grow today and launch today and are successful have done that and gotten the brand equity out of it versus, I don't know any company besides maybe Trivago that's launched on TV to get the brand equity they need.
Paul Gelb, thank you very much. Paul will be around the rest of the morning. You can grab him later to talk about more